Good evening and welcome to the Inner West Council's first Future Focus Forum. My name's Peter Gainsford. I'm the General Manager of the Inner West Council. Shortly, I'll be handing over to Councillor Colin Hesse for the official welcome and acknowledgement of council, acknowledgement of country. Sorry, my apologies. He's standing in for Mayor Councillor Rochelle Porteous, who can't be with us this evening as she has another arrangement appointment. Before I do, I just want to run through some housekeeping points. The online meeting's to finish at 7:30 this evening. After the presentations, we'll be inviting you to submit written questions using the Q&A tool. The Q&A tool is that there's an icon at the top of your screen. You won't be able to use as attendees your microphones or cameras in the meeting. You won't be accessing the chat function, so you can just use the Q&A. We've allocated approximately 30 minutes at the end for questions, and please note we'll moderate those. So we'll try and any key themes we'll put through. So just be conscious of that. A note about privacy: we're recording the meeting. It'll be available in a few days on Council's You'll Say Inner West website. If your comment is broadcast, your name will be visible to the online audience and future viewers of things. So be careful in how you frame your questions. We'll moderate them, but we will be recording those as well. By providing your name in the online meeting, you consent to your name being visible as well. So I'll now hand over to Councillor Hesse to do for the official welcome.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome everyone to tonight's event. It's really great to have your company. It's really important to have your feedback about the future of Council's strategic plan. It is ultimately your plan. That's what we're on about tonight. As we begin the meeting, I wish to acknowledge that we'll meet tonight on the land of the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation, and I wish to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd now like to pass back to Peter, the General Manager, and Peter will talk us through the first few slides. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thanks very much. We're just going to share a screen now, so we'll go on. So we'll move on to the next slide, and I'll do a bit of an introduction to what we're about today. So Council has a community strategic plan called Our Inner West 2036. It's our vision for the future. It's a legislative requirement. All councils have community strategic plans. And so it goes through a series of things and answering these questions. The following questions are where we are now, what do we want to be, how are we going to get there, and how do we know when we've got there, essentially. So it's got long-term goals and strategies and ways of how to measure our progress towards the vision. And many partners are needed to deliver the community's vision, not just council, because you've got to remember, if it's a community strategic plan, there could be things in there that the community aspire to have in the area that aren't necessarily that fall under the jurisdiction of council to deliver. So that's important for people to think about that, but it doesn't mean that it can't be in the community strategic plan. And if it was a public transport initiative, then council, when they develop their priorities, it might become more of an advocacy role for council. But you'll find through a lot of the priorities, a lot of things that fall out of the CSP, as we like to call it, that our council do deliver. So, and essentially, once we've done the community strategic plan, all of our other prioritisation and planning that we do falls out of this, so it guides our work. Got it. So this just gives you a bit of a history. As I said, we're doing a review of the community strategic plan. Back in 2016-17, in the lead up to this was the Inner West Council's first community strategic plan. There was an extensive community engagement that was done. So councils, when you do your community strategic plan, you don't necessarily do this. You do a full review every time and every 4 years. The CSP, as I said, ours one has a life to 2036. It's a lot whenever our future planning documents have that horizon as well. So we did a really in-depth and managed to get input from over 7,000 people. And we took a good 18 months to do it. And there was a whole heap of alignment that we had to do with state plans and strategic plans. You can sort of see on the timeline there that took us from 16 right through. We did community pop-ups, we did workshops with creative workers, We did photo competitions, we did youth surveys, adult surveys, staff workshops, and went to a number of events that we could work with, and ultimately getting us to a point of adoption of a draft CSP in 2018. So the Community Strategic Plan has 5 high-level strategic directions, 23 outcomes and 68 strategies. So we start at the higher level and come down, and that's what guides a lot of the activities that councils do, as we try and essentially make the Inner West Council an even better place to live. So as we focus on these priorities. Go to the next slide. So I sort of touched on this. The CSP must be reviewed with every new council term, and the community is invited to provide input. One of the things we're going to do tonight to help you with your input, instead of just us presenting it to you, we're going to go through a couple of strategic directions in detail. So we're going to go through an ecological, sustainable Inner West. And when we do that, we're going to get presentations from John Stubel, our Urban Sustainability Manager, Helen Bradley, our Resource Recovery Planning Manager, and Luke Murtaz, our Acting Senior Manager, Environment Sustainability. Then we'll move on to our second strategic direction, unique, livable, networked neighbourhoods. And we're going to have Harjeet Atwal, our Senior Manager of Planning, and Munud Wickramasinghe, our Traffic and Transport Manager, who will also talk to you. So we'll run through all of those, and then at the end, as I touched on earlier, there'll be opportunities for questions for you. I'm going to hand over to John Stubel.
Great, thanks, Peter. Next slide, thanks. So I'm going to provide an overview tonight on 2 outcomes in the Community Strategic Plan relating to urban sustainability and climate change. The first one is outcome 1.1, and the strategies under this outcome cover a lot of ground, including community support for environmental sustainability, for example, grants and community education programs, adapting to a changing climate, including urban heat, enabling food growing, and developing planning controls to enable greater sustainability and livability. Some of the activities that Council has been undertaking to support these outcomes include providing support to the community through environmental grants, a sustainable schools and community gardens network, which contributes to peer-to-peer learning and support, and Council's Green Living Centre, which last year reached around 8,700 people through webinars, workshops, events and social media. We've also been focusing on enabling community gardens through a new community gardens policy and guidelines. There's around 19 community gardens in the Inner West, and around 10 of these are on council managed land. In relation to planning and development, the local strategic planning statement identifies areas in the Inner West with the greatest opportunity for low carbon development, and background work has commenced to develop the evidence-based planning controls. Next slide, thanks. The next strategic direction, outcome 1.4, the Inner West is a zero emissions community that generates and owns clean energy, is primarily focused on carbon emissions reduction, and this has been a really high priority area for the Inner West community, as we saw in the recent 2021 community survey results. Strategy 1, support local adoption of clean renewable energy, has been a significant focus for Council over the last 3 to 4 years, and has included recruiting a renewable energy innovation officer to staff, and Council being awarded with a national award by the Climate Council for the Go Solar program. In 2019, Council declared a climate emergency and adopted a climate and renewable strategy with the following targets. Council operations are carbon neutral and 100% renewable for electricity by 2025. And by 2036, community greenhouse gas emissions are 75% less than they were in 2017, and net zero before 2050. Next slide, thank you. You can see from the two paragraphs there how important it is to address carbon emissions from electricity. It makes up nearly 3/4 of both council and community greenhouse gas emissions. Some positive news is that council and the community have both more than doubled their solar capacity in recent years. And Inner West Council now has solar on more than 35 buildings, including a massive 250 kilowatt system on Ashfield Aquatic Centre. Council's carbon emissions have been cut by over 30% since 2015-16 through initiatives such as purchasing renewable energy from Moree Solar Farm to power 25% of council operational energy needs and replacing older inefficient street lights on residential roads with highly efficient LEDs, and that's reduced street lighting electricity consumption by 20%, or around 9% of council's overall electricity consumption. Next slide, thanks. So everyone would be aware that there are some significant challenges, but also some opportunities to address community greenhouse gases. Many of the causes of community greenhouse gases are outside of council's control, and they sit with other tiers of government or sectors. For example, transitioning the national electricity grid to renewables and investments in public transport. But council does have an important role with assisting our community and leading by example. And the climate and renewables strategy adopted in 2019 identified the actions where council can have the greatest influence. For example, our programs aimed at apartments and for people renting their home. It's quite unique in the Inner West that around 40% of households in the Inner West are renting and 44% of total dwellings are apartments. And traditionally it's been very difficult for those two sectors to get solar. Council's identified over 200 strata buildings in the Inner West LGA that could achieve a 5 to 7 year payback on solar. And we've been offering these properties a free independent solar feasibility assessment and report and technical advice at their strata meeting. We're also promoting innovative projects such as the Haystack Solar Garden in the Riverina. Inner West residents that have become co-op members can purchase a solar plot, and the electricity generated will be credited back to their power bill. The benefit of a solar garden is that any energy customer can participate and benefit from solar energy without actually needing to put panels on their own roof. So that's a great solution for people that find it difficult to get solar on their roofs, such as renters. Next slide, thanks. So councils, over the next 4 years, council will focus on leading by example. We'll achieve our renewable electricity and carbon neutral targets. We're aiming to procure 100% renewable electricity before 2025. We'll be working with Ausgrid to replace inefficient street lights on the main roads. We've been working on the residential roads, but there's still main roads to do. We'll continue to roll out solar on any feasible new or existing facilities that council owns. We'll commence the zero emissions fleet transition by developing a fleet transition plan in the first half of 2022. We'll be setting up council's Green Living Centre at a new sustainability hub in Summerhill. And while the focus has strongly been on carbon reduction, we do also need to adapt to a changing climate, and we'll need to review climate change risk assessments and adaptation planning. And we'll also be working on planning controls to influence low carbon and climate adapted development. Next slide, thank you. Longer term, we'll be working with other tiers of government and industry and the community on net zero emissions. We're aiming for a zero emissions fleet, including our trucks, light commercial, passenger fleet, mowers, etc. As emissions from energy become less of a concern, we expect there will be a growing recognition and focus on embodied emissions, which are all the greenhouse gas emissions that are released as part of making a product or service that's ready for consumption. Things like building materials, food, clothing, cars are a massive source of greenhouse gas emissions. And overall, we're working towards a sustainable and livable inner west, where quality of life is decoupled from high carbon emissions and pollution. There's many moving parts across social, environmental and economic considerations that will all need to align. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm Helen Bradley, Resource Recovery Planning Manager at Inner West Council. So I'm just going to talk to you about the resource recovery strategic direction. So our Inner West vision is 1.5. It's the Inner West is a zero waste community with an active share economy by 2036. And the outcomes that we've got sitting under this include supporting people to avoid waste and reuse, repair, recycle and share. The second being to provide local reuse and recycling infrastructure. The third, to divert organic material from landfill. And finally, to advocate for comprehensive extended producer responsibility. A zero waste strategy was recently adopted by Council in August this year. And we've also used the information available in state and federal resource recovery strategies. Next slide, please. So where we want to be is actually somewhere that we're valuing waste as a valuable resource. So we need to make disposal or landfill the very last option for all the materials generated. So we need to be putting reuse, repair and recycling at the forefront. Obviously, a circular economy is a whole of society approach, and it requires, the design, the production, the distribution, the consumption, the collection, the recycling, all to be included in the same loop. Whereas traditionally we've had a very linear process, whereas we take an item once it's produced, we buy it, we use it, and then we dispose it. Whereas now we're changing that thinking. Next slide, please. So this diagram here is essentially from data from one of our waste audits. So this is looking at the average garbage bin. We've ascertained that about almost 80% of what goes into the average garbage bin could be recovered, and only 20% is actual garbage that would need some form of landfill or processing. So the opportunities that we've really identified are to maximise the use of our existing services. So that can be our recycling, our garden organics and our drop-offs like our community recycling centres. To introduce food recovery, so we've just done food in apartments over the last 12 months and we'll be focusing on food in houses shortly, and looking at other materials that we can develop programs around, such as textiles. The real challenges for us in Sydney Metro are the lack of infrastructure for processing some of these materials, so transfer stations and processing or recycling facilities. There is a shortage and state government is addressing that, and we're working very closely with the rest of the region and state government on that. And landfill capacity is diminishing across the state. So we really need to be limiting what goes to landfill. Next slide, please. So how are we going to get to zero waste? I've just picked out a few of our targets from our zero waste strategy. One being that we reduce the waste landfilled per capita by 50% by 2036. So what we need to do here again is really focus on that waste avoidance, improve reuse, repair, sharing and recycling, and improve access to services, both council run and community, and facilities. An example of what we're doing under this target is we are aiming to open a reuse centre at Summerhill, the former depot, and we're working with the Bauer, well-known reuse organisation within the Inner West. Oh, my screen's gone black. Sorry, I'm just waiting for that screen to return.
It all looks good here, Helen.
Okay, I'll just go to my backup then, because my screen's gone black. I'm very sorry. The next target being to reduce food and garden organics disposed in landfill by 60% by 2030. So what we're doing in the next 3 years is we're going to be introducing a FOGO service, which is a food and garden organics together, as well as supporting our community with home composting and food waste avoidance education and initiatives. And our final target there is to reduce the amount of hazardous waste in the garbage to 50% by 2036. So this is materials such as batteries, light globes, paints. We don't want these in the landfill bin. And we've got 2 community recycling centres open to the community now, and we've also just last week introduced a new service, which is a door-to-door pickup with Recycle Smart for those tricky to recycle items. Thank you. That's all from Resource Recovery.
Thank you, Helen. And our next speaker will be Luke Murtaz, the Acting Senior Manager, Environment and Sustainability. Luke.
Thanks, Councillor. Hi everyone. So I'm normally a manager in Council's town planning area, but I'm just helping out with the environment team at the moment. Urban ecology focuses on 2 outcomes in the CSP, and we sort of colloquially refer to those as the green and blue strategies, and you might hear us refer to green and blue infrastructure. And it's pretty easy to remember what those are. Even for me, the green ones relate to flora and fauna, and the blue ones relate to water outcomes. So I've just included this first image here. It's a little bit provocative, just so we can get an appreciation for one of the big constraints on biodiversity in the inner west. And the image on the right is showing us what's, sorry, the image on the left there is showing us where our ecological communities were. And then the image on the right is showing us what's left once you take into account all of the developed land in the inner west. So that's giving you an idea of what council has to work with as an establishment point. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the green strategic element from the CSP, and you can see there the keywords like increasing forests and connected habitats and those sort of things. And council's responsibilities here link to things like the Biodiversity Conservation Act, as well as state plans and regional strategies, and those inform our local policies. So we coordinate a lot of community volunteers and bush regenerators to help restore our natural areas, and people tend to think of big trees when they hear the words like canopy and forest and those sort of things, but a lot of our work is in what we call understory vegetation, and it's often in little pockets alongside more actively used areas, like sporting fields and golf courses and transport corridors and that sort of thing. And council's achieved quite a lot in this area recently. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've been able to increase those natural areas that we manage for wildlife and habitat. We've increased them by nearly 20% to about 21 hectares. So that's starting to put a bit of a dent in that map that I showed you on the first slide. So next slide, please. All right, so this is the blue strategic area, and you can see there the CSP is talking about the use of water as a resource, but also about the health of our waterways. And council's responsibilities in this area mainly come from things like the Coastal Management Act, and again, that state and regional planning layer, which feeds down into our local policies. We're involved in some very important regional partnerships in this area, so including organisations that you might have heard of, like the Cooks River Alliance and the Parramatta River Catchment Group. And those sort of organisations have just launched regional litter prevention strategies, and council will run local programs off the back of those. Okay, so a good example of blue infrastructure is at Dibble Waterhole, where council's just made a big improvement in water quality with a remediation project. And also in water sensitive urban design that I've mentioned there on the slide, where council helps residents design and install backyard rain gardens. That's the photograph in the middle of the slide there. And in the past couple of years, we've also started to focus, instead of the old-fashioned pipes and culverts type drainage design in some of our public areas, we've started to roll out more natural drainage systems, which can also double as habitat. And there's a good example at Steel Park that's been completed recently that you can see for yourself. Next slide, please. So here's just a couple of examples. On the left there, I've got council's rainwater tank rebate scheme, where we give grants to residents towards the cost of installing a new rainwater tank, but also we hold monthly seminars to teach people about the benefits of collecting rainwater and help people select the right tank for their house. And so every month we get more and more inner west homes that are reducing their impact on our rivers through that program. On the right, I really like these series of photographs with the revegetation of Leichhardt Park. It shows that those habitat links there. You can see there were two sections of urban forest which have been connected up. And the thing that I like most about this imagery, though, is it shows that balancing act of delivering those green links and also making sure that we maintain those urban amenities there. You can see the sporting field, the bay run, and then there's some space along the foreshore which has been left to provide that scenic quality, and our residents can still enjoy those views to the water, and there's some space left over for people to have things like wedding ceremonies and all that sort of stuff along the foreshore there. So that's quite a good, in a nutshell, example of green infrastructure outcome there. Next slide, please. Now, I won't talk to all of these points because I've covered a lot of them already, but I should mention one here. A big opportunity is in something that we call sub-catchment planning. It's quite a detailed process, but essentially what it involves is doing very extensive consultation with a particular neighbourhood and getting our residents local knowledge about what happens during a storm and what needs to be upgraded in their area. And the idea is that the engineering plans become locally tailored and less sort of a broad blanket approach, the more traditional approach. So there's about 6 areas in the inner west which have sub-catchment plans already completed, and council would like to do more of these. All right, and then the biggest challenge in urban ecology by far, no surprise there, is caused by development. For example, like in Rozelle, where we've seen lots of trees lost to state government work going on down there. And so we've also seen a lot of vegetation lost on private land in the last 2 or 3 years, especially as apartments get built, but also even as we do COVID renovations and those sort of things. And council gets those trees replaced, but it does take quite a while for the canopy to recover. So next slide, please. Okay, so where are we headed? Many people don't realise that the inner west is home to some threatened species. We even had an echidna spotted in Marrickville on the weekend who became a bit of a Facebook star, I think. And to help protect that kind of wildlife, there's some key policy work that we really need to finish. We'd also like to really build on the enthusiasm for our community nurseries. Coming out of COVID, we've had quite a bit of demand for the retail side of our nurseries, but also quite a bit of enthusiasm for people wanting to volunteer. But also we'd like to get some community partnerships going. So for example, in Randwick, the Indigigrow group is involved with Randwick Council there, and we'd like to get something like that happening in the inner west as well. And then there's some more aspirational targets there. Like obviously you can swim at Dawn Fraser, of course, but the long-term plan is that more of our river swim sites might become viable through the work that council's doing with our regional partners in cleaning up our rivers. And then finally, we'd like to keep chipping away at the increase that we're getting in our natural areas just bit by bit. So one way we can do that is if there's those big infrastructure projects like WestConnex and they end up with leftover bits of land, we might put our hand up and say, you know, hey, we can use that and add it to our wildlife corridors. Or the other way is through those partnerships with private landholders. So we might ask that people, you know, invite a bit of biodiversity back into their backyards. All right, that's about it from me. I think I'm handing over to the planning guys now.
Luke. Thank you, and thank you to the speakers in our Strategic Direction 1 section, John, Helen and Luke. We now begin our second section of presentations, and I'd like to introduce Harjeet Atwal, who's the Senior Manager of Planning. Thanks, Harjeet.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, everyone. As Councillor mentioned, my name is Harjeet Atwal. I'm the Senior Manager in Planning. I oversee the Development Assessment Team and the Strategic Planning Team. And today I'll be talking to you about Strategic Direction 2, which is Unique, Livable, Network Neighbourhoods. The Community Strategic Plan sets out 6 objectives, known as outcomes, to help guide Council in delivering the unique, livable network neighbourhoods. I will go through the outcomes very quickly. Outcome 2.1 is development is designed for sustainability and makes life better. Outcome 2.2, the unique character and heritage of neighbourhoods is retained and enhanced. Outcome 2.3, public spaces are high quality, welcoming and enjoyable places, seamlessly connected with their surroundings. Outcome 2.4, everyone has a roof over their head and a suitable place to call home. Outcome 2.5, public transport is reliable, accessible, connected and enjoyable. And finally, outcome 2.6, people are walking, cycling and moving around Inner West with ease. In the following slides, myself and my colleague Manoj Wickramasinghe will be going through what mechanisms Council use to facilitate the delivery of these 6 outcomes. I will be addressing from a land use perspective and Manoj will be addressing from a transport planning perspective. Next slide, please. Right, so Council facilitates the delivery of the outcomes of these strategic directions by establishing land use planning policies to help guide the development in the Inner West. The following steps are taken to establish such policies. Step 1 is to identify key principles that the state government release for the Inner West through the documents of the Greater Sydney Regional Plan and the Eastern City District Plan. These documents outline such things as the need for housing growth and targets, the importance of retaining employment lands, and the delivery of infrastructure to sustain the population growth across the Inner West. Step 2 is to identify key priorities the local community wish to see delivered in the Inner West. These are set by the directions and outcomes in the community strategic plan that I just went through for this particular direction, and the local strategic planning statement, which I will go through in a bit more detail in the next slide. Step 3 is to undertaking detailed analysis of the state principles and the local priorities and establish overarching recommendations within various local strategies. And those strategies include the local housing strategy, employment and retail land strategy, and the integrated transport strategy. These are the foundation documents to guide the preparation of land use planning policies. I'll expand on these strategies in the next few slides as well to help guide through that. The final step, which is our future focus, is step 4, is the preparation and implementation of land use planning policies. That is the local environmental plan and development control plan, which outline our planning controls to guide development within the Inner West. Next slide, please. Thank you. The current strategic plans that are adopted to inform the land use policies, as previously mentioned in my last slide, is the local strategic planning statement. This document guide land use in the Inner West for the next 20 years and act as a link between the New South Wales government's regional and district plans and the finer grained land use planning undertaken by Council at a local level to ensure consistency in its strategic planning approaches. This differs from the Community Strategic Plan, which is a broader focus on achieving the long-term social, environmental and economic aspirations of the Inner West community. Council adopted the local strategic planning statement in March 2020 following extensive community consultation and feedback. The local housing strategy, which is the next foundation strategy, establishes Council's vision for providing housing in the Inner West. The local housing strategy links Council's vision for housing with the housing objectives and targets the New South Wales Government's regional and district plans provide. Council's local housing strategy was adopted in March 2020 and identifies the unique housing needs for the Inner West current and future residents, develops an approach to boost housing supply, diversity and affordability, responding to local needs while enhancing the character of local neighbourhoods, provides for population and housing growth, aligns growth with infrastructure, supports the role of centres and informs affordable rental housing mechanisms and strategies to increase affordable housing supply in the Inner West. An example for the local housing strategy outcome is the local housing strategy identifies investigation areas such as Marrickville, Dulwich Hill and North Ashfield, and identifies that a potential of approximately 1,300 dwellings across those areas could be provided to align with state government's housing targets. But the strategy also encourages that this dwelling potential be around transport nodes, and also it is to provide a bit more of a balanced approach to where we locate those dwellings to ensure that we don't that we maintained local vitality and character of of our local neighbourhoods and areas in those investigation areas. So there's a lot of directions coming out of these local housing strategies, and the steps are now to look at it and do some fine-grained work and work out what the potential of those areas are and how do we translate them into the planning controls within Council's local environmental plan and development control plan. The next strategy is the employment and retail land strategy. Adopted in September 2020, provides a strategic approach for management of employment lands to maximise productivity, facilitate job growth and contribute to the long-term prosperity of the Inner West local area. For example, the employment and retail land strategy outlines the need to maintain urban services and unique creative industries that are within the Inner West, that are unique to the Inner West. It also outlines the importance to undertake studies in key centres such as Dulwich Hill Station, Dulwich Hill Village and Dulwich Hill West to identify how these centres interact and what planning controls do we need to put in place to ensure the prosperity of these areas. The final strategy is the Integrator transport strategy. It is a high-level framework for evaluating detailed transport initiatives and land use planning that will help Council build our future transport nodes. It was adopted by Council in March 2020, and my colleague Manud Wickramasinghe, who will be speaking after myself, will provide a bit more detail around the integrated transport strategy. Next slide, please. So the future focus. So Council's future focus is moving forward is trying to establish planning policies or reviewing, I should say, our planning policies to help the fine-grained development within the Inner West and to uphold the outcomes and the directions of the unique, livable, networked neighbourhoods. And this is done through the local environmental plan. So local environmental plan guides planning decisions in the Inner West. The LEP, or the local environmental plan, does this through zoning and development control plans, which are derived from the previous strategies and provide a framework for the way land should be used. The local environmental plans are the main planning tool to shape the future of Inner West communities and also ensure local development is done appropriately in accordance with the New South Wales land use principles and the local priorities that are identified through the local strategic planning statements and the community strategic plan. Council currently has 3 local environmental planning policies gazetted from the former Ashfield, Marrickville and Leichhardt Council. However, Council has adopted a comprehensive Inner West local environmental plan in June 2020 and Council is awaiting a gazettal of that from the state government. That Inner West local environmental plan was a housekeeping plan that combined all the former 3 councils' local environmental plans into one document. However, the future focus now is to review that comprehensive local environmental plan and to look at all the investigation areas and all the centre studies that we need to do and see what controls and what do we need to establish in the local environmental plan to support and to support the vitality of the Inner West and continue the progress. The second Council policy is the development control plans. It's a guideline document that reflects the finer grained planning controls to complement the local environmental plan. Just like the local environmental plan, the planning controls are derived from the strategies I previously mentioned, which is the local housing strategy, the employment and retail land strategy, the integrated transport strategy, and also the local strategic planning statement. Council currently has 3 development control plans, and that's from the former councils. And as part of the local environmental plan project, our future focus will be pulling that development control plan into one harmonised development control plan and establishing finer grain information and planning controls in there to help guide development. So for this local environmental plan and development control plan project, we will be doing extensive community consultation next year to help us to guide us through that process to establish those controls. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Harjeet. We'll now move on to Manud Wickramasinghe, Traffic and Transport Planning Manager. Manud.
Thanks, Councillor.
My name's Manohar Wickramasinghe. As mentioned, I'm the Traffic and Transport Planning Manager at Inner West Council. My team really looks at traffic engineering, road safety and transport planning. So today I'm just going to take you through the Integrated Transport Strategy, or ITS for short. The ITS is Council's high purpose and guide other policies such as the DCP. It's also used to frame responses to state government projects and also establish a series of policies and plans. The ITS primarily impacts strategic direction too, but it also assists with other directions through contributions to the environment, economy, and community. Next slide, please. So just we'll briefly go over the ITS vision. So the vision of the ITS is that a growing number of Inner West residents, workers, and visitors prefer to walk, cycle, and use public transport because it's safe, convenient, enjoyable, and healthy. That Inner West transitions to environmentally sustainable transport, and that everyone is connected to their community and local services and can access educational, retail, cultural, and recreational districts, as well as job services across the local and regional area. And finally, that transport network enhances local economic vitality with freight and goods movements separated from people by space and/or time. Next slide, please. So we've got also a user hierarchy, which really divides up our different transport modes and prioritizes certain modes over others. So at the top, we've got our active transport mode. So right at the top is walking. And that's really in recognition to the fact that all transport trips start with walking, either at the start or end of your journey. So in recognition of that and the health benefits associated with active transport, walking fits up the top with facilities for people living with a disability and other specialist transport services. Following that is the other aspect of active transport being cycling. And we've also put in mobility devices and bicycle deliveries in that wedge. After that, we've got public transport, delivery services and freight. And finally, we've got private vehicles and taxis at the bottom. If I jump to the next slide, we actually expand on that private vehicle category. So we prioritize those as well. So at the top, we've got our car share components where we support the use of shared use of vehicles, and we do that because it encourages reduced car ownership and it limits environmental impacts. So that forms the top of it. And then we've got private electric vehicles towards the bottom, and right at the bottom, we've got private non-electric vehicles. So your diesel and petrol vehicles. Next slide, please. So the user hierarchy and the vision of the ITS really informed the priorities of the ITS. So I'll quickly run through each of the 7 priorities and provide a few examples of what those priorities could mean. So the first one is to plan land use to support sustainable transport for reduced travel times and distances. So that could be new developments providing through-site links for better pedestrian connectivity. Could be encouraging land use mix so that there's a variety of services that can be accessed from fewer trips, so reducing the actual need to go out multiple times to access different services or travel a long distance to access all the services you need. B is to facilitate safety, personal security, and equitable access for all. That could be done through road safety action plans, lowering speed limits. We've got a priority to have 40-kilometer speed limits throughout the Inner West LGA and even 30-kilometer-per-hour trials in certain high pedestrian activity areas or where there's a very strong need for cyclist amenity. And it can also mean just ensuring that there's good quality footpaths in the area. C is to prioritize people in centers and main streets and revitalize key roads. So that's developing public domain master plans for main streets, providing pedestrian priority in centers and main streets, and even reducing the number of new vehicle crossings across the footpath to reduce the amount of conflict points. D is to progress active transport infrastructure, services and programs. And examples are to integrate pedestrian and bicycle networks with the Greenway, develop a separated cycle route network, advocate for pedestrian crossings on all legs to signalize intersections. E is to encourage a shift to public and shared transport for private vehicles. So we could be prescribing maximum parking rates informed by accessibility to public transport. We could be advocating for increased capacity on inner west public transport services during peak hours, and also encouraging car share. F, which is the second last of the priorities, is to manage an efficient freight and goods delivery network to enhance inner west livability. So that will involve reviewing and defining freight and delivery routes and incentivizing deliveries outside of peak pedestrian periods, for example. And finally, G is to harness technology to improve information, safety, travel choices, and environmental incomes. So we'll be doing this by developing a policy initially for electric vehicles, and then support other initiatives that'll come up, like demand responsive public transport and connected and automated vehicles in the future. And so what does this all mean in terms of next steps? So I'll just quickly run through some of our policies that have and are being developed. So right up the top, we've got our car share policy. That was a harmonization policy that was adopted earlier this year. So that outlines how we're going to deal with car share and really promote car share through the inner west. Next, we've got the pedestrian access mobility plan, which again, the plan itself is completed. It will be put up to council in February for adoption, but that really looks at the entire inner west. We prioritize pedestrian routes and we audit all of those routes and try to find all the different improvements we could do to pedestrian access and make the area very, very walkable. So that's found an enormous body of work that we could be doing. I believe it's $8 million of high priority works identified. So that's going to be a really key document moving forward to help see actual change to pedestrian infrastructure in the ground. Then we've got the electric vehicle encouragement strategy, which has just started development. So the bulk of the work's going to be happening next year. But look at what we can do to encourage and assist with electric vehicles, and particularly the charging side of electric vehicles, and how we can do that when so many of our dwellings don't have off-street parking to undertake that charging from. Some of the other plans are the freight and delivery movement plan, the inner west parking strategy, which will consider both private and public domain parking, the inner west at 40 strategy, which, as I touched on before, is about reducing speed limits, noting the enormous benefits in terms of severity of crashes with even minor changes to speed limits and the speed of impacts. And finally, the public transport position paper, which will outline goals and areas for advocacy in terms of public transport. Although public transport is a state government matter, council does play a key advocacy role, and we also have a key strategy in getting people to those public transport services. So strategies like the PAMP play a big role in improving public transport, even though they don't directly relate to public transport. So yeah, that's really what we've got coming up. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Manod. And just to remind people listening in tonight, and in answer to one of the questions that's come through, yes, tonight's event is being recorded and will be available in the next couple of days on Council's website. I'm going to hand over back now to the General Manager, Peter Gainsford, who will moderate the questions. And if you do have questions, I would heartily encourage you to get typing. Thank you. Peter.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so we've only got a couple of questions in so far. The first one is for Manud, and it's transport. It's from Fiona. Transport emissions are the second highest at 20% of community emissions in the Inner West Council. Most households in Inner West Council already have zero emissions vehicles in the shed, but are reluctant to use bikes for their transport until there is a safe and connected bike network. What will Council do to fast track the implementation of a safe, connected bike network? So that's the question,
Peter.
Manoj.
So look, we luckily do have some existing bike plans from the former council areas, which we have been implementing key priorities from. But I totally agree, like the cyclists and bicycles are going to be a key priority for us moving forward. I'm very keen to see our bicycle strategy really come up with a series of actions and routes that that are really deliverable, that are prioritized and deliverable. And I suppose that'll be the key moving forward, is just to get that plan up and running and implemented as soon as possible. So that's probably my comment, Peter.
Great, thanks, Manud. The next question is for Harjeet, and it's a question from Joe B. Is there any opportunity to create some new large parks, particularly in areas which are under medium high density development pressure? So this one's from Joe Blackman. So what are council going to do as the population growth increases? What are we doing about improving and creating new open space?
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Joe, for that question. What council's doing as part of the review of the local environmental plan and development control plans is trying to look at where recreational space is further needed for the population growth. And we're looking at various options through the whole process of how do we supply that additional need. As you know, there's no new land use release areas in Inner West, so it's very difficult to, put large parks in on existing built-up sites. So there's a few options that we can consider looking in, is either acquiring land and dedicating it as open space, or when developments are coming through or with proposals on large precinct sites, considering allocating a portion of that to be dedicated to open space, and doing other innovative, creative solutions to build open space within the Inner West. And that's something that we will work through with yourselves as a community to get some ideas on how do we approach that in the next few years. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Harjeet. The next question is for Helen Bradley, and it's from Keith Stellard. So thank you for your presentation. Just a second. Thank you for your presentation. Can council reintroduce the regular collection of large items on specific days? This will increase recovery and reuse. Council's changes to collection of large items have made community recovery and recycling more difficult, and almost certainly increased the volume of material going to landfill. Prior to the changes, many people collected and reused items left on the roadside on the prefixed days. More than half the furniture in my apartment has been collected and recycled. So this is about how we, in some areas of the LGA, we've harmonised the service. In some area of the LGA, you used to be able to put your general household out on the footpath twice a year and would be collected on a set day, and now we've gone for a booking service which you can do online for free. So I might handle that to Helen.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so we have changed to the booked cleanup service. It doesn't actually affect reuse and recycling rates, because what we're doing is we're encouraging people to click on a number of other opportunities to reuse, such as the Bower or online sharing groups, before they actually book a cleanup. We will be putting information in everybody's letterboxes over the next month about the cleanup service, and to be reusing materials as a first option and using this as a last resort. As we said, we don't want to be sending material to landfill. Our contractor does have about a 76% recovery rate from the material that we do collect and take for processing from the curbside. But again, that avoidance, reuse, repair is much better than post-sorting and recovery materials at the facility. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Helen. And the next question is to Luke Murtaz, but I might do some of it. It's a long question, so I might do part and then I'll hand over to Luke. And about an ecological, sustainable Inner West, and it's from Keith Stellard again. Can council make its investments in environmental improvement and achievements clear? At the moment, they're hidden within the budget for the Parks Improvement Program, and I assume that sporting facilities, which do not promote environmental improvement, they take a large proportion. So can Council introduce indicators quantifying the outcomes of such as the total area of green space, percentage of tree cover, the area of habitat supporting small native birds, and biodiversity indicators? Without transparency in the investment and corresponding indicators, it's not possible for Council or the community to assess Council's investments and the work in environmental sustainability. Keith, you've raised a really good point, and it's something that I've talked to the councils about since I came back to Inner West Council as the general manager. We do need to have greater performance indicators. And so it's transparency. So we're working across the board, not only sustainability, a lot of things, so the community can see. And then the best way to do that is have it trending, so you can see what the results were year in, year out. And you can see which way we're heading in all our performance. And that could be, the square metres of tree canopy, area of bush regeneration. So, but Luke, I might hand to you. We are working on that, but if you've got anything specific on those performance indicators?
So a bit more recently, we've begun to do aerial surveys of tree canopy and start to measure the changes in those sort of things to look at canopy loss or canopy increase, but also to look at things like the urban heat island effect and that sort of thing. And also to look at areas that we can target to increase habitat, which I know Keith's particularly interested in. I think I'm going for a walk around Roselle Bay with him next week. But the other thing is we do publish indicators, not necessarily financial indicators, but we do publish indicators about annual growth in, like I mentioned in my presentation, about increased areas of natural habitat that are under our management now, increased areas that we're treating with natural drainage systems rather than the traditional engineering treatments and those sort of things. So that's been part of Council's reporting that's just come on in the last few years. So we are starting to report those sort of things, but it's not a long-term thing that you can compare to previous years. It's just something that Council has started to adopt a bit more recently. I'll try and, that's the best answer that I can give the forum at the moment. I'll try and bring some more detailed information to Keith when I meet with you next week.
Excellent, thanks for that. I'll tell you what, there's only, we've got a good, in terms of participants, everyone's really engaged. So thank you for those from the community that are on the line. It's fantastic the questions are coming through. And it helps, these questions also help staff to articulate and help us in future presentations. So thank you for the questions. The next one is from Liz Loxley. What's been planned to create green links for safe walking and cycling between the Greenway and village centres such as Dulwich Hill, Haberfield, etc.? This could be, everyone could have a crack at this, but I might start with Manood from some of the linkage, and I don't know whether Jeet or Luke have anything else to add, but I'll go to you first, Manood.
Thanks, Pete. It might not be green links from my perspective, but certainly the strategies like the PAMP and the bike strategy will be looking at improving connections from those high pedestrian generators. So it's often part of the methodology in building up these plans is to look at where people are, where they want to be, and where they need to be. And areas like the Greenway are priority areas that we need to link people to through to. So we'll be incorporating that into our bike and pedestrian plans moving forward.
Thank you for that. I don't know if anyone else has got anything they wanted to add.
Peter, just from a planning policy perspective, that's something that we can incorporate in our development control plans is when we're looking at particular precincts within the Inner West, we can look at links, providing better links to public transport or bike links or the Greenway to ensure that developments complement that and encourage that and embrace that. So that's something that we can work around with and establishing planning controls around that.
Yes, thanks very much, Harjeet. Look, I must apologise. We love, in local government land, we love an acronym. So we'll have an abbreviation for everything. I started saying CSP, which is Community Strategic Plan. Manood pulled out a really good one before, which was the PAMP. It's actually a Pedestrian Access Mobility Plan, which is a strategy which has just been finished and will be going to council in the new year, which has identified all the major pedestrian routes within the LGA. That links to all major transport nodes, shopping centres and the like, and really looks at the accessibility side of it. And I think it's come up with, is it $8 million or $4 million worth of priority works, Manood? You might know off the top of your head that will do so.
Yeah, $8 million priority works.
So that's certainly something that will be taken to the new council and prioritising of where we need to do it. I think walking is the most popular recreational activity. You won't get any argument for anything else. We've got a beautiful area that you can walk around. Let's make it as accessible as possible as we possibly can. So that will certainly be a priority going forward. So that's what a PAMP is. If you didn't learn anything else tonight, you'll know that. So the next question is to Harjeet. It's about the Inner West LEP, and it's about from Bridget Cleaver about will residents have a chance to provide input into the LEP? And then it also says that Bridget's passionate about the Cooks River and he's worried that Sydney Water can release sewage into it in heavy rains. And it'd be great if the LEP could work with Sydney Water to stop this. It's outrageous. It's killing our native fauna and flora. I'll just start with the answer to that, and then I'll go to Jeet about the engagement with the LEP. It's really the role, Sydney Water, this is an issue that council's had for a very long time with Sydney Water about sewerage overflows whenever it rains. It's not only Cooks River, there's a whole heap of other waterways that are impacted by this. Councils continue to advocate in that space. Sydney Water are aware of their issues, and I just think there's, passionate groups of local residents need to keep working. Our waterways are getting cleaner, but it's still not good enough. And I think we just need to keep, this is an advocacy piece that we need to keep working with Sydney Water to make sure that it does. It's really, really sad when that still happens in this day and age. And I suppose when I talked about the community strategic plan and priorities, it could be a priority, but the role of council would be that advocacy side of it. The LEP may not touch something like that, but I'll let Harjeet talk about the engagement that we might have with the residents on that.
Thanks, Peter. You're right. Unfortunately, the local environmental plan doesn't really control sewerage and going Cooks River and that work with the Sydney Water. However, in terms of engagement, yes, we will be engaging with the community for the local environmental plan and the development control plans. There'll be various stages through the project that we will be consulting with the community, and that will include doing mail outs and seeking written feedback, also doing open forums, in a COVID-safe environment, maybe virtual at this point, or it may be face-to-face, depending on what the environment looks like at that point in time. So there will be a lot of consultation done to ensure that we do reach all demographics of the Inner West to get their feedback on all aspects. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Harjeet. The next question is from Kiran Kashyap. It's a question to John Steeble. To aid the transition to greater renewable energy, are there opportunities for the introduction of community batteries similar to the Ausgrid community battery in Beacon Hill? Could this be an opportunity for renewable energy to be more accessible to those in the community who might not otherwise be able to make capital investments in their own panels and batteries?
Yep. Thanks for the question. Yeah, absolutely. It's something that the council's interested in and we've made those intentions clear to Ausgrid and also the Australian Energy Regulator as well. Council itself is not able to do that. We're not a licensed participant in the Australian energy market, so council doesn't have a role in being able to do that. But we have made it clear to Ausgrid that we're very interested. The three sites that are being piloted around Sydney at the moment, they were chosen by Ausgrid, and we did put up our hands for that. But they've typically been in areas where there's very, very high solar take-up, and also where Ausgrid have seen that investing in a community battery would be a better investment for them than investing in poles and wires. There isn't actually there's no formal submission or application process offered to councils to request a community battery for their community, but absolutely we have been talking to the various players in the energy market to say that Inner West Council is interested.
That's great, thanks, John. The next question is from Sarah McNeil. With all of the wonderful tunnels, with all the underground tunnels that are being built, are we counting the emissions from the vehicles traversing those tunnels in our totals? And do we know how many tonnes that is? For you, John, again.
Yeah, the answer to that from my perspective is no, not specifically from tunnels, but we do get figures on transport emissions through a wonderful platform that Resilient Sydney gives to councils, which provides a whole lot of data on carbon emissions from various sources, which we receive, but it's more of a sort of a whole of transport type view rather than specifically tunnels. But it would be interesting to obtain that data if we can.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. The next one is from Anonymous. Anonymous attendee, I'd love to see the local streets reclaimed for people and made into linear parks with bike lanes and traffic filters, has been done in London and Paris. Are any plans like this on the agenda? So to reclaim some of our road network and take them back for people and parks. So I might go to I might start with Manud first, and maybe Harjeet could lean into with that.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, look, I wouldn't say anything's off the table in terms of reclaiming road space. But there is obviously the issue of competing interests for any particular road. So we do look at taking out road space for separated bidirectional paths, like I think of Livingston Road in Marrickville. And then even it's more of a pedestrian improvement, but King Street's getting some of its road space reclaimed as part of the Gateway project by Transport for New South Wales, and council actively involved. So look, there are separate cycleway projects on our agenda, and I wouldn't say anything's off the table in future plans, but it's really about those competing transport uses and uses for any particular road in developing those plans.
Yeah, thanks, Manud. And I think, look, it'd be a goal for council, and from my perspective, is when we do all these plans, it's we compete for a lot of space everywhere, whether it's open space, street parks, all the needs that we need to do. But if we can repurpose something that was essentially, for the motor vehicle to something else, it doesn't need to be as wide as it is. I think we'll take the opportunity to do that. We certainly want to make sure where we can't build, it's not practical to build a large park. We want linkages as best we can throughout the LGA, which we're trying to do with the bike and the pan. But Harjeet, I don't know whether with the planning that you're doing, whether there's anything you wanted to add to the opportunity for.
Oh, no, I think Manod's basically addressed it. It is something that we can consider, but there's competing, obviously, needs from across the community, and that's something that we would have to consider as part of the plan making, and the controls.
All righty. Thanks, Harjeet. The next one is for Manud again. We're getting a bit of a transport theme happening. Just bear with me. So commuters currently drive their cars to Croydon and Summerhill and other stations and park all day when there's free on-street parking available. All this space could be used to provide safe, separated bike lanes. Rather than building any more commuter car parks, as in Ashfield, could council build bike commuter parking? This would take up so much less space and encourage cycling for commuters and other people.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, look, bike commuter parking, I think, is essential really to help encourage more active transport to our stations. We do look at opportunities to put in more bike parking, and certainly when we get station precinct plans from the state government, when they're seeking feedback from council, we do encourage increased bicycle storage facilities at those locations. So it's something we're keen to see more of, and we'll continue to pursue it.
Excellent. Thanks, Manud. Often bike routes, another one from an anonymous, there's a couple of anonymous ones here, but they're good questions. So often bike routes are not continuous due to parked trailers impinging on the space that could be otherwise used for bike lanes. What are council's plans for freeing up this space?
So that's a good question, Pete. So trailers are a bit of a bugbear for me. They do obstruct a lot of things on the road, and I think a lot of it comes down to the placement of some of those bike lanes that we've had in the past being right up against the parking lane, and then when you do have heavy vehicles or trailers which are slightly wider than a passenger vehicle, they start to impede on that space. So we're looking at for a lot of our bike paths, looking at different designs which take cyclists out of those dooring zones, as they're known, and make it safer for those cyclists.
Okay,
trust everything in that question.
Yep, thank you. Another anonymous question for John Steeble. The Climate Council say Australia should be aiming to be net zero by 2035 to avoid dangerous climate change. Why is the Inner West aiming for 2050? How will we pay for the extra damage from going slow?
Okay.
You, John.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Thank you. Well, we're not going slow. So the Inner West Council itself, in terms of our corporate emissions, will be zero emissions or net zero emissions by 2025. With the community's emissions, we when we did the climate and renewable strategy, which I'd invite you to have a look at, there's a couple of pathways there that we've put into that plan which show that if all of the different pieces of the puzzle fall into place, and then what we're talking about here is things that council unfortunately doesn't control, like the energy grid, public transport, those sorts of things. We had a look at what would be a best case scenario situation, and we've mapped that out. And under a best case scenario, it's looking like you could achieve a 75% reduction by 2036. But this would be significant greening of the Australian energy grid, and a number of other things falling into place. So the big issue for us with community emissions is that if you go back to the pie graph that I put up earlier, Electricity and transport makes up almost 90% of emissions. Now, we don't have control over the electricity system, and transport, Manud's spoken about all of the good things that council can do to promote better transport choices. So the real issue there with community emissions is the community coming on board and doing what they can do, and also the other tiers of government and industry working in with us to try to reach that emissions reduction. The other thing I'd probably like to say is that targets based on a local government area are quite problematic for the same reasons as I was just discussing before. It's not really realistic to say that the Inner West will have one target and the neighbouring council will have another. We really need, a whole of state or whole of Australia target when it comes to community emissions. But what we've tried to demonstrate through the climate and renewable strategy is what are the things that the Inner West can do? Where can we have the most impact? How can we help our community in the best way based on our community demographics? And then how can council lead by example by drastically cutting emissions by 2025? And we've already done that. We've reduced emissions by 33% over the last few years. And I'm very confident that we'll get to net zero emissions by 2025.
Thank you for that, John. The next question from Liz Loxley is, what's council planning with respects to place-based planning and engagement? I've been engaging with councillors and council staff to find out council's plans for Dulwich Hill across streetscape cleaning, land use planning, transport links, property and laneways. It requires numerous interactions across council. There's a bit of a typo there. So it requires a lot of, and what can we do to help navigate across various teams of council in a joined up place-based way? I suppose when it comes to our future planning and our engagement, we'll certainly do engagement across each area and do specific plans. I suppose in terms of, I'll answer this one, I suppose in terms of dealing with areas, there's certainly council needs to, we've just employed a urban designer who will go around and be doing future plans for a lot of our areas and town centres. We haven't gone to a full place-based model, but I'm certainly conscious that we need to be able to make it easier in responding to services, because there's two things. One is a future plan of what the area is, and the other one is that regular touch point. So we've had some discussions here from an economic development perspective and also just from operational perspective of how we can connect better in those areas. So certainly something that we want to work and be better at. I can rest assured that the planning for the areas will be certainly place-based. Just got to work out in the long term how we do it for that regular interactions. But I do want us to look away from, certainly from the economic and in those shopping centres, that we're proactive in working with local businesses and the community to make the area a better place. Another one from an anonymous is, can you explain, I'm just conscious of the time, I've got 10 more minutes, I'm going to try and get through all the questions if I can, but we will have to stop at 7:30. Anonymous, please explain how council will assist people who want to buy an electric car but don't have off-street parking. I'll do that to John.
I can maybe take that one, Pete. So,
okay, sorry, Manud, thank you.
So that really falls under our electric vehicle strategy. So we're very cognizant that a lot of our residents don't have off-street parking available for charging. So the strategy will look at what opportunities are available for electric vehicle charging, and that could be utilizing, say, councils' car parks, entering into private agreements, and even influencing our development control plan and requiring that new developments come with a certain percentage of electric vehicle charging stations. So that's all going to be explored in that electric vehicle charging strategy. And that's one of the reasons why it's been pushed forward, is because electric vehicles are coming, and they're coming soon, and we need to have a strategy for it. So that'll be next year.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of other ones for Manud. There's considerable danger, from Rob, considerable danger to pedestrians posed by some intersections where you've got laneways exiting onto local streets and roads. And it's danger because people are often, it's got to deal with blind and accessible issues. And although the traffic is light, vehicles seldom stop before crossing the footpath. Can we adopt a council-wide strategy, a very minimum of painting stop at the building line? So when cars come out of laneways and cross that area where people are crossing the road, they go a bit slower.
Yeah, look, I think each laneway is a little bit different, and they all probably need to be looked at a little bit differently. Stop lines are typically not put back at the building lines. Because when you stop there, you don't really have good sight lines anyway. I can appreciate that vehicles are slowing with a stop sign, but they're probably 2 or 3 meters from the give way control in any respect. So typical strategies for addressing those have been, when, say, development has occurred, looking at splays at the building lines to provide some sight lines, providing fencing that's more permeable, potentially putting in warning signs if there's space available for that kind of facility. So look, I think we're more than happy to have a look at those on a case-by-case basis and look at what strategies are available to assist. And I should also add that because vehicles are usually traveling at, even at any speed, they may have trouble sighting pedestrians. There is also the onus on the pedestrian to look for the vehicle, particularly because they are moving slower. They usually have better opportunity to have a look down a laneway. And so we do roll out behavioural campaigns such as a Look Out Before You Step Out campaign through Transport for New South Wales and the Look Stencil campaign to encourage really a two-way interaction between pedestrians and motorists. Because really, when you have that two-way interaction, that's when you're going to get the best road safety outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Manud. Can you just touch on one other one? Do we have targets? What are we doing to promote children attending the local school by walking or riding bikes as opposed to getting dropped off?
So again, I think, Pete, it just comes down to the strategies to improve the paths. We did at one stage have a strategy where we contacted schools and helped them develop some walking paths and preferred routes to get to a school. I don't think we've done that for a couple of years now, but it's something we might look at later if Transport's looking to again go down that kind of strategy. So sorry, when I mentioned Transport, I mean Transport often give us strategies to implement through our road safety program, and the current program is Look Out Before You Step Out, which I mentioned earlier, but there might be another statewide priority release about schools that we can pursue that's more behavioural.
Yeah, no worries, thank you. There's a question there about the CSP. I'll answer this one. The CSPs weren't, the previous council CSPs weren't quantifiable. Will council's aspirations be quantifiable? We're trying to do our best to have as many measurables you can see going forward. So we're happy to work on that and try and do that. Next question, council's doing a lot on reducing carbon emissions. From Liz Loxley, what is about climate resilience and reducing climate risk? For John?
Yeah, we certainly have been focusing a lot on mitigation. Obviously, it has been a major focus. There has been, I guess, quite a few resilience actions happening across council in particular projects. You'll see, for example, a lot of shading features going up in any new parks. There's been massive amounts of street tree planting happening around the area. There's a lot of water sensitive urban design going in, which has a cooling effect. But what we probably don't have at the moment is an overarching strategy. And I think in my presentation I mentioned that that was something that we need to look at over the next term of council, is updating our climate risk assessment and then doing some sort of overarching adaptation plan.
Thank you, John. What plans does council have to use Aboriginal names for places in our LGA? It's great that we're using Aboriginal names for wards. It's certainly something, I don't know if Jeet can, it's got, I don't know where we've got to do our reconciliation action plan. There'll be something certainly we'll be talking to the new council about. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything for that question. Certainly anything that we do that's new, I might just finish it. Anything we do with new is obviously we work with our local committees to make sure that we reflect the history and area of the LGA, and we'll do that. But certainly in terms of policy going forward, it's probably something that we talk to the new council about. So next question, it seems like council wants to support cycling for everyone, but the community doesn't like giving up parking to create safe bike routes. What we're doing to change the hearts and minds just beyond having a policy. I suppose there's a lot of education that we do, and I'll happy if someone wants to chime in, they can. We do it like with anything with parking. We'll educate the community as much as we possibly can on where we need to be, and I think that's a long journey that we need to go on, but we just need to be strong in our messaging out there at all levels, that the roadway isn't owned by the individual that has the car out the front, that it's shared. We just need to keep working with the benefits of that. Sometimes it takes bold decision making from council to do that. We'll keep doing it through our communications. It's quite consistent, the messaging you get from council in that space. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything with that respect, with educating people on the benefits of alternative transport.
Yeah, and Pete, the only thing I would add is we've got such good cycling infrastructure going in now that really showcases what a street could look like with better cycling infrastructure. So I think as we get more and more of those in, it's going to really build the support for cycling, and getting those better connections makes cycling much more attractive as we go. So, you know, the small wins we get through now will just make it easier and easier moving forward.
Yeah. Given I'm conscious it's 7:29, I'm not going to get through all the questions. I'm just looking at, it's all about, we'll take these on notice. There's questions about integrated transport and prioritising parking reduction over time. We are developing a new parking policy going forward, educating the community on changing things. Like I said, we'll continue to do that about things for street closures and bike libraries and all these things that we will do and work. Citizens Assembly to educate us about better active transport. We'd like your feedback on tonight. That gives us opportunities. We're trying this forum to talk to the community by doing it online. No, there was a thank you from Liz Loxley about their comprehensive answer, John, on the collective actions of the community. Certainly climate is being considered for council's decisions when we make things. Are there plans to harness the Summerhill Reuse Centre? I've nearly got through all the questions. As a hub that's connected to other organisations in the community. Certainly we'll see what how that works out once we do that, when we keep talking to the community about that, but we certainly want the reuse to go on. That's happening. It's an important part of our zero waste strategy. And a thank you from Keith. It's possible to put one's name down for notification for similar events in the future. Yes, you can do that. And we're happy to engage. You should register through our Your Say website. I think we are done for the questions. I'm going to hand over to Colin Hesse, our councillor, to wrap up.
Thanks, Peter. And look, a big thank you to everyone tonight. Your questions have been really, really great. I really wish that, and maybe there are some councillors out there, but I really wish that all councillors could hear your questions tonight, because I think they'd be quite inspiring and really show an interesting direction for where council's headed. I do understand, just on the question on Aboriginal names, that there is a policy being drafted. I'm not sure when that's going to come to council, but I know it's underway. What we're asking you to do next is to give feedback on what you saw tonight. If there's anything missing or any changes you'd like to make, what your top 3 priorities are for council to deliver between 2022 and 2026, and what you most value about the Inner West and what makes it all unique. You can do that through Your Say Inner West. I'm sure most of you are very aware of that website. You can also mail us. The address there is on the screen. Well, it's not the screen. Inner West Council, PO Box 14. That's 14 Pedestrian 2049. Attention to Sarah White. You can probably email too. There's probably a link on the website. All those comments will be reviewed, both from tonight and what you write on Your Say and anything else, and will be used to inform the proposed updates to the Community Strategic Plan. And they'll be reviewed by the new council in early 2022, February or March. And then the new draft community plan will go on public exhibition for 28 days for comment, and will come back to council for endorsement at the end of June. So do stay engaged. There is, of course, one more Future Focus Forum. That's on Wednesday, the 24th of November, between 6 and 7:30. It's again online, and you can hear discussions around one of the things we do really well in the Inner West, creative communities and a strong economy. Really, really important discussion. And the strategic direction around caring, happy, healthy communities. I guess we've covered some of that tonight, but in more detail again on Wednesday, the 24th of November. You can go online and book some more. So thank you again. And I'd like to say a big thank you to all the senior staff of council, the general manager, and all the other council staff who presented tonight. I know they are good people, and they work very hard for you, our community. So a big thank you to them, and a big thank you to you, most of all, of course, to you for joining us tonight for tonight's session. Without you, none of us would be relevant. So thanks again. Have a good night.